don't know what to say anymore. My neuropathy. I don't know. My feet are so weak. They feel like I don't know. I asked my doctor, could the muscles in my feet be atrophying? Could there be atrophy? Could atrophy be happening in my feet? And he said, yep, it could be. My feet feel so weak to try to carry me and, to walk out in the snow and the ice, and my feet are killing me, and I'm high risk for falling, and I don't have the greatest footwear. My winter has just started today. And I was out there tonight. My feet are so weak. I come home, my feet are in so much pain. My arms and legs are like lead. Complex PTSD, right? People who have complex PTSD. Mine was never diagnosed by a doctor because they wanted to diagnose all the symptoms as separate disorders so they could apply a drug for every symptom, right? Because complex PTSD is not in the DSM. So how they get you is, it's not in the DSM deliberately because it's advantageous for them to diagnose every single symptom as a separate mental disorder, like depression, anxiety, this, that, the other thing. And then they can give you a drug for everything they diagnose you with and make you into a lifetime customer, right? Complex PTSD, they're putting it off, and there are doctors that have been campaigning for years now to get it into the DSM as a separate disorder, and they do not want to do it. My complex PTSD was never diagnosed by a doctor. And then finally, I was just having like 15, 20 years ago, I was starting to really question everything that was going on. That's when I started to really question. And I was seeing this psychologist, and he said, well, you know that you have complex PTSD, right? Because he knew I was seeing a doctor, and he knew I was on medications. And I said, no, what's that? And so that was about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And he was just blown away. And he said, well, you have PTSD, right? And I said, no, what's that? And he was just horrified because I'm on all these medications. I've got all these diagnoses. And, I think it's just a con job. And I started to question it all, and I wanted he never suggested I get off the medications, but I think it's futile and contradictory to be on a bunch of medications, and you're impaired from the medications, and you're paying some guy a fortune for therapy, and you can't process what you're there, you can't process because you're too medicated. And these people have to be really careful. They have to be careful not to step on each other's toes and get reprimanded and get in trouble. And how many times is there a professional? How many professionals a year, different professionals, like social workers, psychologists, counselors, physiotherapists, this, that, the other thing, how many professionals a year want to speak up about something and they can't because they know they'll get into trouble? Pharmacists, other doctors. The right thing would be to speak up. But if they do, like, for example, speak up saying, you know what, this woman's on way too many medications. Or speak up and say, you know what, there's no way. You know what, I had a professional tell me once, I have seen hundreds of people with blah, blah, blah. And she said, you don't have that. And I was so medicated, I couldn't really process what she was saying to me. I didn't understand that she was really going out of her way to plant a seed. But you know what, regardless, the seed was still planted, even though I didn't fully understand. And that was about 22 years ago. I think it was 22 years ago. And but I also think it's wrong for you to be on a whole bunch of medications and you're impaired. You can't see that, but I'm sure these professionals can see that, and you're paying them, $125 an hour or $200 an hour for counseling, and you are too medicated to really process anything. Like, it to me, that's inappropriate. And it's almost like somebody's babysitting you for $200 an hour, and it's like being robbed. It's not right. And what a counselor's got two decisions to make. They can sit there week after week or month after month and take your money and take thousands of dollars from you, or they can speak up, and I don't think they would ever say, look, you're too medicated to. But it's an ethical thing, right? It's an ethical thing when you're not helping this person at all. You're babysitting them. They're giving you $125, whereas they could sit in a coffee shop and a friend could listen to them for $5 instead of they're paying you $125 to just sit and listen. You're just babysitting. You're not making any progress. You know what I mean? I look back on those years, I did not understand. There were times I was so medicated as prescribed, right? Not me taking inappropriate amounts of drugs. This was as prescribed. And hell yes, I'm resentful. I spent thousands of dollars on counseling. I was way too drugged up. I would like I now have a whole lot of those pharmacy records, and I'm ticked off, and I wish I could do something about it. But no one cares. You speak up and they're going to get you. They're going to punish you for trying to speak up. Or I've heard every excuse. Well, that was a long time ago. So what? I have concerns about this person's prescribing. Struggling to breathe from these medications. A whole bunch of doctors knew. Complex PTSD. They use medical doctors, family doctors, ER doctors, etc. They see this in somewhere along the line, PTSD was in my chart. I was never told I had it though. And, but I mean, that's my real diagnosis. And, doctors use this really works. It's really, I don't think now that doctors should know that you have PTSD or complex PTSD. Looking through my history with doctors and me trying to get accurately misdiagnosed for anything, once they knew about the PTSD or complex PTSD, they would imagine all sorts of horrific things that never happened, right? So they think they're going to be diplomatic and respectful, and they're not going to ask you, "Whoa, what's that all about? Where's your PTSD from? Or what's your complex PTSD from?" They're going to be diplomatic, and they think they're going to be sensitive and not ask you to so that they're not crossing over any boundaries or making you uncomfortable. But they do something more dangerous, and that is, and my family's notorious for this, doing this to people. They will sit and imagine things about you, and they'll think that it's true. So they'll jump to all sorts of conclusions, and they'll behave according to the assumptions that they made. So, for example, I had this one doctor. I went in because my ribs. One family doctor. I was asking her, like, my ribs are longer on one side, my leg seems shorter on one side. Like, after a while standing to do the dishes, I've got 1 foot off the ground because, like, 1 foot is longer or something. I wanted to know what was going on. Like, why are my ribs like 2 inches longer on one side? Oh, she sits me down in the chair and puts her hand on mine and gets all compassionate and stuff, and starts talking about, like, maybe my parents threw me down a flight of stairs and broke my ribs. And I'm like, no, I never endured any physical violence or anything. She jumped to wild conclusions over and over again. I was too young really to and honestly, I was medicated. I was too intimidated, and I didn't know my way around doctors, and I wasn't assertive yet, and so she would jump. I didn't know how to speak up in those days, but so your stuff can remain undiagnosed, or they're misdiagnosing you. They can misdiagnose life and death issues based on jumping to conclusions about your PTSD or complex PTSD, right? So all my complex sleep issues, all my serious complex sleep issues were severe insomnia, severe sleep apnea, respiratory depression, sleepwalking, sleep eating. Everything was being misdiagnosed as anxiety or PTSD, and I knew they were misdiagnosing everything. Doctors shouldn't be allowed to even know that because it can be so detrimental because of that factor, because they jump to conclusions and think, well, that's a whole different ballgame. Like, I'll switch over from medical issues and start imagining all these psych issues. Like, if doctors are powerful enough to misdiagnose like that and end up harming us by misdiagnosing long term, then they should all have in-depth psych training. Because, I mean, they've taken our lives by doing this sort of thing, right?